Thanks, Adam. Thank you very much for setting that bar high. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining the final session of the day on production of digital twin, buy versus build. My name is Seth Taylor, and I'll be moderating today's session. So the topic of buy versus build is one that is especially near and dear to my heart. I work at Chevron's Technical Center as a product owner for digital twin, and this is a topic that has consumed many hours and stoked many passions in our internal efforts to develop an enterprise digital twin strategy. So I'm excited to host a session to shed some light on the topic and hopefully help others who may be in the early stages of planning and execution get more insight on this decision. I'm joined by four outstanding panelists who bring broad domain expertise and deep industry experience to our discussion. We have Dan Jeavons, General Manager of Data Science at Shell, Ben Sokolowski, Internal Transformation Specialist at Wintershall, Jeff Stroh, Senior Director, Digital and Analytics at McDermott, and Shane McArdle, Senior Vice President, Digital Energy for Kongsberg Digital. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Thank you for spending some time with us today. Before we get started, let me just remind audience members, we welcome your questions, comments, and input. If you post questions to the event chat thread, I will do my best to surface them to the panel. And with that, we'll get going. So the buy versus build decision is an important one for any company that is keen to leverage digital twin technology. One that deserves due consideration given the implications for how digital twin solutions will be used, maintained, and ultimately refined over the life cycle. So Shane, I wanted to start with you. You spend a lot of time working with customers to define digital twin needs. What are some factors we should consider in the buy versus build decision?
Yeah, good question to kick off the session. First of all, I'm coming from the industrial software side of things, so I'm more biased to, let's say, the buy. But of course, I have to acknowledge it's not as black and white as that. There are many companies that already embarked on a digital journey. They have started to operationalize maybe some of their digital roadmap, and they've already built quite a bit of the infrastructure themselves. And maybe at a certain point they come and they say, hey, listen, we've done enough now internally. Now we need or want to buy some services that are out there in the market to leapfrog or to bring them to the next level on their digital roadmap. Or you have vendors out there that are just starting from scratch. And the idea of building up an organization to actually build it themselves is very daunting, and they just want to understand, hey, is there someone out there that has a solution that we can just use straight off the shelf? So I do acknowledge it's not quite black and white, and there's probably an in-between mode of build versus buy. Some of the considerations when you, and some of the key criteria that we definitely come across is interoperability and flexibility of the technology. As you said, Seth, lots of people now have started this journey. They may already have done some. People are in consideration, but there is an existing architecture there, either an IT architecture, an OT architecture, and they may have built out upon that over the last couple of years. But it's very varied, and industrial data is complicated. It is complicated, and you need a flexible tech stack, in this case we're digital twin, that can fit and integrate quite quickly and easily into a very variable landscape. So interoperability always top of mind when we're out there and talking to customers. Flexibility, it's not just about the maturity of maybe a centralized IT decision, but also the maturity of an asset or the business. They may be, a 50 or 60-year-old asset. We've come across that, and we're working with that age of an asset compared to an asset that just, had first oil on deck from last year. So very, very disparate and different levels of data maturity. So again, coming back to that flexibility. And then finally, there's two other considerations that come up quite a bit. One is lock-in. Gone are the days of enterprise monolithic systems. People don't want that anymore. Operators don't want that. They want flexibility. They want openness. They want to be able to leverage an ecosystem of partners. And we talked about today how Kongsberg, C3I, and Shell, were coming together to partner around components that each of us know very well, and each of us come with an expertise. Why would you want to just go all in with one vendor when you can leverage a broader ecosystem of partners? So lock-in is always there, and it's always a top of mind. And then just to balance that, speed. Speed is fundamentally important. We talk about working in agile ways. Now, dare I say, energy companies and large IOCs and NOCs, they can be quite bureaucratic, and you can argue that that's justifiable due to the critical nature of what they do, and that's been built over years. But it doesn't lend itself to an agile mindset. So you look at companies like ourselves as an industrial software house. It's part of our DNA. This is what we do. We work agile. We follow DevOps methodology, time to value, pace at rolling out a digital twin. That's what you get when you partner or buy services from people like ourselves. So I try to take a balanced approach there, Seth, to look at it from both sides. Hope that helped.
Yes, thanks, Shane. It was a great way to start us off. You touched on a number of key factors there influencing the decision. Let me maybe kick it over to a couple other panelists to chime in on the same question of important considerations for buy versus build. Dan, is there anything you'd want to add maybe to Shane's opening comments and keep putting the sand there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, let me say I think I agree with a lot of what Shane said, but I think maybe I'll give a different perspective on it and a different lens. I think one thing I want to build on is the idea of ecosystem and openness, and I think that is absolutely fundamental to the way that we in Shell are going about this. I think it's also important to define what we mean by a digital twin, because I think we all often use the term and mean different things. We talk about it as three core components. It's the data around the physical asset that we want to model. It's the models that go with that, be they engineering-based models, first principles-based models, or increasingly AI models. And it's also the visualizations. And bringing all of that together, we call a digital twin. And I think building off of that, what becomes very obvious in the context of an operator is that you can't either buy or build this. Because either one, if you choose that approach exclusively, is probably a bad option. Let me put that in context. We know our data better than anybody else. Hopefully that's true for most organizations. And I think that the key point is that aggregating that data at scale and bringing it together is something that we know best how to do, because we know how to access those systems and how to integrate them and what the data means when it comes out. At the same time, the capabilities that sit around that to bring rapid integration, to bring flexibility, to allow disparate data sources to be integrated, to bring AI model management capabilities to the table. Those things are things that we're not best placed to do because there are good market solutions to do that. And so I think, using a combination of cloud-based technology, platforms like Kongsberg's, platforms like C3's, as Shane alluded to, as well as our own in-house developed models, and integrating all of that into a digital twin, that's really what we're trying to do. And we're trying to roll that out globally. And we're very excited about the results and also some of the integrations that our partners are developing. As Shane mentioned, the C3 Kongsberg integration is a huge step forward, because that coming together of our AI strategy, which I've been accountable for the last 8 years or so, together with the digital twin strategy, I think is going to take the digital twin to the next level and really start to enable some of our visions for it. I'm happy to expand on that a little bit more as we go through today. But I think, at the core of this, I think what's important is to recognize you need to make sure you leverage partners. You need to leverage standard platforms that are available that are industry standards. You need to integrate them and you need to scale them quickly. And I think all of that requires a hybrid build-buy approach. The final thing I'll say is I think it's also really important to understand what value you bring to the table. We've been very fortunate as an organization. We've got a great history and depth in data science, and we've developed specific algorithms for problems that, have impacted us as an operator. And we think that's really helpful to accelerate things like the value of the digital twin. And so we bring that to the table. And I think organizations should look at that. Getting value from data is something that, again, is core to the way that you do business.
Thank you, Dan. So there seems to be some consensus emerging from folks so far that this is most likely a hybrid approach, that there perhaps is no true pure build or pure buy. Not about the need for vendor partnerships. I'm curious to bring Ben into the discussion, because I think he was involved heavily in the build of a digital twin within Wintershall several years ago as an SME. Ben, any perspectives on the buy versus build decision that perhaps haven't been touched on so far?
So basically, I think I could mostly agree on the gray zone, actually, on that, what Dan and Shane mentioned before. But I think what's great on building this architecture and the model behind and so on, you have full control and you know exactly what you get out of it. So there's no maybe there could be some API needed later on, or okay, how can we now apply products on it? So you have full control of it, and we basically have an architecture that is staged, so that you have a first stage with more or less a data warehouse and then feeding into the digital twin platform. So and this is mostly, of course, built with consultants, but mainly built on our own. And this is, I think, a main advantage, because we can quickly react on needs from our organization, no matter if it's in Germany, Norway, maybe abroad in Mexico, what else. So I think this could be a main advantage if you go on the build side. But on the other hand, of course, if you not want to have this huge operational twin, so going back more on the equipment level, then it doesn't make sense to really build something there. Then you go to maybe a pump vendor or something like this and just buy it off the shelf, because most of it offering right now such solutions. Yeah.
Very good. Jeff, I'm sorry, was there a comment from someone? Okay, sorry. Jeff, to bring you into the discussion, so you've spent a fair amount of time at McDermott working with customers to build digital twins. Are there any aspects of the decision that we haven't touched on yet that you think are relevant, that folks going through this process would be keen to learn about?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what everyone's brought up. I think one of the key things here is that a digital twin for an operating asset is a strategic decision. And a lot of the value that you're going to unlock out of that digital twin needs to be defined, and the EPCs and the vendors that are a part of the project and the building of that asset need to provide that information, need to provide it to you in a means that you can consume that and ultimately extract value as part of that digital journey, if you will, through the different phases of a project. And, collaboration with the EPC, collaboration with the OEMs, that's an essential part of delivering that. And I think the industry standardization around some of these data handover aspects and things like that will ultimately help all of us deliver more efficiently and make the digital twins in the operations phase a lot more economical to produce up front.
Yes, you brought up a good point there regarding unlocking value, and clearly there's everyone's trying to get to what are the most compelling use cases, opportunities to use digital twin to unlock value. It's clearly driven very much by the end user. There's also this tension between the openness of a solution, right? So if everyone wants their digital twin to be as open as possible, create data from any and every source, and expose every insight it generates to other solutions, right? So there's key to unlocking value is I think Shane was referring to it as interoperability, flexibility, the openness. I'm wondering if the panel can comment on the role of industry standards in helping to enable this, and how do perhaps lack of standards or emerging standards, how would that help someone to make an informed decision about buy versus build? Are there key learnings from early development work that you all have been involved with that might help others in this space? And maybe I might throw that question first to Jeff, because Jeff, I know you've had some insight on the need for standards, and how that might inform this.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I mean, frankly, from an EPC perspective, you owner operators drive us nuts, because each and every one of you has got different standards. You got different tools you want to use. You want everything delivered differently. And every project, it seems, it's evolving, right? Which is the nature of the industry. We're in a fast moving digital transformation of everything that we do. So, the change is inevitable. It's not an option anymore. It's going to come on there. But I do think, and it's really good to see some of the CFOS for one, the IOGP coming together on Chip 33, some of these different efforts on standardizing around data and how we exchange that data will ultimately help deliver a more integrated, higher quality digital asset at the end of a project phase than we've seen in the past. I mean, when you've got mountains and mountains of PDF files, you've got things that, are impossible to cross-check because you've got 10 different sources of that. You're not going to get the same quality of a digital twin as you will when the data is integrated, the tools are interoperable, and there's a clear strategy and driver through the project phase for handover to the owner-operator.
Just a small comment on that, Seth, because I think that's very relevant, and it links back to this kind of build it yourself, because when you have a standard, it means the whole industry has to kind of revolve around that standard, and that's vendors, as operators, as everything. And if you go and build something yourself, so in a way you could be cutting yourself off from accessing what the industry may be standardizing on its own. So there has to be an incentive for vendors out there to actually be part of this, and if everyone's building themselves, then where's the incentive, and then where's the innovation? It becomes siloed inside single organizations. So I think standards are really, really important. It incentivizes the broader industry. And Dan, I know you were chomping at the bit there to talk a little bit about OSDU and OAI in particular. So I'll hand you over there in a second. But I think these standards make and kind of create this ecosystem of partners where everyone has to come, and you get a common data foundation, a common data standard, and it just makes it easier. It makes it easier for vendors. It makes it easier for software companies. It makes it easier for operators and EPC, of course, service providers as well. So just a small comment there, and linking it back to building yourself, isolating it a little bit, and how you can really leverage the partnership. And Dan, I know, a lot of this, you've been working passionately for years in this area.
Yeah, you have to be careful, Shane. You'll get me on my soapbox on this one. But no, I mean, I totally echo what Jeff's saying. I mean, I think I think the industry in general, we've caused ourselves no end of issues by lack of data standards and everybody building their own proprietary stacks. And I think I'm really encouraged, I have to say, by the transition. I think, Jeff, the problems aren't going to be over tomorrow. We all recognize we've got a ways to go, but the Mercury release of OSDU, which came out recently, I think is a huge step in the right direction. I mean, who would have thought that an open data standard with support from amongst others, a significant contribution from Schlumberger, a significant contribution from Shell, and of course support from all of the main cloud vendors would be launched. I think it's a remarkable step forward for the industry. Now, of course, it doesn't cover the full scope of data that we want it to yet. It doesn't cover all of the aspects of what we want it to be, which is an open data platform for the energy industry, and perhaps even beyond that. But I think at the same time, it's very much starting to be a common standard that indeed, as you say, Shane, starts to make sense for software vendors to get on board with, and starts to make it make it compelling because there are 200 companies signed up to that now. And I think it's that sort of movement that we've got to create. And you mentioned OAI, and I think that's also a key piece, which is even where we compete, I think the point is having standardized API interchange. So I'm not expecting that everyone's going to share their proprietary applications with each other. But what we can do is make those applications interoperate and make sure that the API integrations between those things are clear and that they fit together. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this to make it easier for the operator to run the facility at the end. That's the objective. Whether you're developing the facility, whether you're operating the facility, whether you're building the software for the facility, we need to make sure that at the end of the day, the thing works well. And so it's in everybody's interest to have clear ways of integration and making the user experience a fantastic one. And so that's really what OAI and OSDU are about. And that's why we're driving that strategy so hard from the Shell perspective.
Very good, Dan. Those are some great comments. I want to come back to a couple things that both you touched on and Shane touched on. I'm just monitoring the chat thread, and a question popped up. Why would given the emergence of standards and the need to want to avoid digital silos, why would anyone consider a do-it-yourself, or what I would say maybe term heavy build approach? And Ben, I might ask you to chime in here, because if I'm not mistaken, you do have some experience with that path of sort of building internally digital twin, obviously leveraging partner technology along the way. But maybe you can chime in on are there aspects of the do-it-yourself approach that lend themselves better to connecting the technology to work that's happening in your specific end user community, right? And to your specific workflows. Do you have experience from Wintershall Dia that this is maybe a benefit of the do-it-yourself or heavy build approach?
Oh, so maybe separating a little bit from the end user perspective. We have the user base from the front line, and they don't care about any kind of structure, architecture, or that kind of things we are challenging every day. They are product driven. They want to have a product on hand that works for them. They don't mind why it doesn't work. They just get to help desk and say, okay, it doesn't work. But if we come more to the headquarter part of user base, they're mostly keen why things work the way it work, and also how ingestion processes, for example, work with all this Azure setup and so on. But it was never really challenging for the user base itself, and also having own capabilities to go into deep with them, or having partners to connect them. So if this answer the question makes sense.
Okay, very good, thank you. I was surprised in our initial opening dialogue regarding key factors in buy versus build. No one specifically touched on total cost of ownership. I don't know if that's because it's a third rail of sorts in this particular decision or discussion, but I'm wondering if we can touch briefly on that, because I'm sure it's on the mind of many folks, attending today. How do we get our arms around total cost of ownership in the buy versus build, or even the hybrid model approach? And I won't send this to anyone in particular, but certainly if you have experience with discussions internally about how this works and how you've accounted for that in some of your decision making, that could be very useful.
Maybe I will chip in then. So as we started with our first digital twin, it was the top-down approach. So our board decided to create, I think, 9 initiatives around several topics, and one was the digital twin approach. So there came the money from actually for the first throw. But then, of course, you have to make stakeholder management to really get the affected asset on board to be willing to pay on that, because it's not that cheap, no matter if you build or buy. So you will shift from board is paying through, maybe you have shared payment until you reach, okay, the asset has to pay on their own. And therefore you have to create, of course, use cases on your path that will have a payout for it, so that they see, okay, on one hand, we're paying this amount of money, and on the other hand, you will have this amount of savings. So this is basically it for us.
I can talk about it from the cost side, Seth, because we fundamentally understand as a software house what it actually costs to build, develop, maintain, and support software that is a digital twin. That's a fundamental part of digital twin. It takes an organization. You need solution architects, you need developers, you need QA developers, you need to consider, from a maintenance point of view, have you got the organization to do that? I mean, simple authentication of all the users, engagement with the cloud service providers to make sure that the services are up to date and you're using them all the time. Cybersecurity, that's another element you have to think about. So when you think of building it, sometimes you don't consider the full life cycle of what you're actually doing. There's a huge cost there, and what you can do when you partner with someone, I think you can get the same level of overview and control that you want if you were to build it yourself through a good, well-structured partnership. And the cost is distributed because, from our perspective, we're building it for the industry. We're not building it for one vendor or one operator or anything like that. So I would argue that the cost is diluted across the industry. So we can afford to carry and price certain elements of a digital twin much lower than to build it yourself as a single operator. So total cost of ownership, absolutely. And I don't think people fully think through what it takes. It's like working with a Raspberry Pi. I love it. I sit at home here and I build a little computer board for my son. Am I going to do it for all 5 of us in the family? No, I'll buy 3 iPads or 4 iPads. It's just easier. So it's fun to do this, but there's also a cost in time, effort, and long-term support of this that you have to be cognizant about as well.
Thanks, Shane. Dan, were you going to say?
I think you're on mute, Dan.
Did we lose Dan's audio?
I don't hear him, at least.
Can you hear me now, Seth? Sorry.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, you're good, Dan.
Okay, sorry, I think I got muted for a second. So, I was just going to build on that, Shane. I mean, broadly speaking, I agree with you. I will say one thing, though. I think the thing you have to be careful of from the buy side of this, from a TCO perspective, is also buying too early. One of the things that we've learned from is often the best thing is to build your own MVP. And I think, Benjamin, this is where you're coming from a little bit. So really to understand what's the business problem you're trying to solve, and to do that cheaply and to develop something yourself is often a very good way to understand the business problem. So I think it's important not to exclusively jump into a buy conversation. The first thing is understanding the problem at hand, and then to figure out what's the most suitable software and which partners can help you solve that problem. I do agree, though, that the allure of building your own platform can easily drag you in, and has dragged me in on occasion through my career. And I think we have to be so careful of that, because as Shane rightly points out, staying ahead of the market, staying competitive is an expensive business, and it's an expensive business if you're doing that all for yourselves. And you really have to be clear, if you're going to do that, how you're going to be differentiated, which I think is a really important aspect of this as well.
Those are great points. I really appreciate the comments, Shane, about not just the cost to implement, right, and initially deploy, but to maintain, sustain over time, and distributing those costs across industry. Those are considerations we may not always have when you're looking at an initial upfront assessment of how do I get this into the hands of a user quickly and at low cost. So those are great points. I wanted to ask a question about who should be consulted in this decision about buy versus build. Is this strictly an IT leadership decision to make, or is this is this a broader decision that should be made with input from broad coalition of end users, support folks, IT folks? Any insight on that? Any perspectives that might help folks making this decision?
I'm happy to go first.
Go for it, Dan.
I think the key thing there is that we've focused very heavily in Shell on natural teams. So, having IT architects, IT managers, as well as professionals in the field of data science or AI, as well as business folks and operators at the table, I think that's fundamental. I think we've got, again, I think as an industry, we've had a tendency to be quite functionally siloed in the way that we've gone about things. And I think that's been changing a lot in the last few years. And I think it's that natural teaming across organizational boundaries, which is a new culture, often driven by digital, that I think is going to be fundamental in these decisions. That's my view anyway. Interested in Shane or others' views on how this is happening elsewhere.
Yeah, I was going to chime in a little bit on that as well, Dan. I mean, I think one of the key things here is ultimately this is meant to deliver business value, right? So there needs to be a driver and there needs to be a push from a business perspective. One of the traps with anything technology related is, you get distracted by the shiny toy and you forget what is the outcome you're trying to get out of it. And I think that that cohesive team you mentioned, I think, is essential in that. I think the technology folks keep the business folks honest on what's possible, whereas the business folks need to keep the technology folks honest in terms of ultimately delivering to a schedule and delivering the value that is being driven there.
100%, Jeff. We've seen different, let's say, setups of this across different operators, but you need the business to course correct any central organization. So you can have a central IT or central digital of excellence, whatever that central contracting entity is that's going to drive operational standardization. That's great because they're normally a strong central team and they have some clout to get stuff done. But of course, they have a mandate but that might not match the business needs. So having a good partnership and collaboration between the central team and the business really is important. And we've seen the value of that because we want to talk about value, but of course you might have to get the data foundation in place. You might have to build all the data pipelines. You'll have to talk about integrating with APIs that may not exist, but are being part of an IT program. And for the business, that's not interesting. They're just going, just fix that, and I want to get straight to the value. So there's really a push-pull here, and I think having both sides of it involved is very, very important.
I wanted to come back to some points that were raised earlier regarding how standards facilitate the ecosystem of partners, and I think a number of folks have commented on the need for an ecosystem of partners to truly deliver digital twin at scale. How I obviously represent a major operator in Chevron. How do we get our arms around the coordination, the relationship management for that ecosystem of partners? That's clearly a key thing that you need to implement and be successful with for successful implementation strategy. Are there any learnings that you all can share, either from your ongoing work with clients or from your own experiences implementing digital twin, that be useful to understand some best practices in that space? Dan, I see you nodding your head. Can I start with you?
Yeah, you're going to get me on my soapbox again, Seth. So I'm sorry about this, but anyway, but no, I mean, I think for me, obviously this has been an area we've been very active in. I mean, OAI has been, the primary thing that I've been driving, which is sort of a formalized ecosystem of partners, which are, if you like, Shell's agreed approach to deploy integrated digital platforms across our organization. And I think, one of the things about that has been, first of all, I think being clear on what each partner brings to the table, and Shane can comment on this. We've been very clear, around, for example, how we want C3 and Kongsberg to work together, and I think that steer is very helpful when you talk about an ecosystem, because by explaining how we see their products fitting together and how that fits to our business, it makes the collaboration between that ecosystem much stronger. I think the other thing is we've found that a formal structure like OAI helps, because by formalizing a little bit and being public about it, you force that commitment from all parties that this is important. I think the final thing I'll say is learn by doing. So, we're not trying to figure everything out. A lot of this, it needs to stay agile, and we need to keep those relationships to a degree dynamic and fluid, and keep a conversation, but a conversation based on trust, and a conversation based on a shared direction and a shared purpose. So that's how we've gone about it. I'm not saying that's the only way. That I'm sure there are others, but it seems to be working well at the moment. Interested if Benjamin or Jeff want to comment on that from their perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right. If you go with an agile mindset or way of working, you get them on board and treat them like they would be your direct colleagues as they are employed. And they will always have this homogeneous way of collaborating, especially thinking about this agile development. So you have all common goal, what you want to achieve. You have always an increment in mind. You want to have there in the end of the sprint. So don't have time actually to create beef amongst the people. So you're always focused. Then maybe you have some socializing events in between, and then this goes out very well, from my past experience at least. And I think Shane would also agree on that.
Yeah, definitely, Ben. No, I think it does start with recognizing, first of all, you can't do everything yourself. You're going to be the best in certain areas, of course, and then there's going to be areas of overlap and synergy. The OAI and in particular this C3, because it's top of mind with Kongsberg. They're best in class with artificial intelligence, and it's fantastic. And then we are best in class in what we do around the digital twin. So there's some natural synergies. Are there overlaps? Of course, there are definitely overlaps in both of what we can do. But it's really making the effort to find those synergies, because you want the overall value add. And it takes commitment. It really does, and to be not fearful. This if you talk about being a partner, you have to act like a partner. And I think, Dan, you're right in what you said, and Ben, you just need to start. You just need to start and understand what works. I don't think there's any easy way to it, Seth, to be honest. But having forums like OAI or OSDU does create the environment to start the discussions, to start exploring. Having an operator that maybe is interested in having both, let's say, companies come in and propose what they can offer and have it integrated, that's even better. But what's great is once that's done the whole industry benefits. The whole industry benefits, because now we already have started that, and we can talk more broadly about it, and other operators can take advantage of what's already begun in OAI. So already, you have to start looking ahead at the benefits. It's not just this one time where I'm a little bit concerned that they're going to take this part or we're going to take that part. It just opens up so much opportunity for the broader industry and change there.
Great. And for those of you keeping score at home, we made it about 40 minutes into the session before the first mention of Agile. So I don't know if that's a kudos
Well done, Seth.
or a well done. I'm going to take one more question from the chat thread. We've only got about 5 minutes left in the session. The question is is it applicable for an EPC company to build a digital twin strategy when the clients, for example, refineries, haven't yet finished digitalization?
Yes, I'll take
And maybe,
that.
Jeff, yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it varies. I think some EPCs have an appetite to do that. They want to have an offering. They want to be able to extend into, say, let's say that O&M space. And I think the opportunity there varies by owner operator. Your small independents that don't want to deal with the platforms and the tools and all this kind of stuff maybe have more appetite than a large NOC or a super major that have already got inbuilt established strategies, to take things forward. So is there opportunity there? Is it a one size fits all? I would say the answer is no on that. But I think it goes back to some of the things that we talked about before, and that partnerships are essential for delivery of that, and an understanding and collaboration with ultimately the owner operator on what are their drivers and would an opportunity fit or not fit in that space.
Thanks, Jeff. So we've got just over 3 minutes left. I wanted to give each of you the opportunity to maybe share one little piece of wisdom or piece of advice or thought nugget to share with people who are in the process, going through the process of making this buy versus build decision. Is there one key piece of advice you'd like to leave with them before we sign off today? And I'll start. Maybe I'll start with you, Dan.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd say two things. Be clear on the value that you bring to the table and where you want to own parts of the stack. So as I said, the data, some of the algorithms, those are good things I think that many companies like ours want to have a say in, but also be clear on your ecosystem and leverage your partners heavily to build the things that to bring to the table the things that actually they can, and they can accelerate your journey. So I think, being really clear on the stack you want to build, the purpose of where you want to go, where you want to differentiate, and build a partner ecosystem that you can rely on. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Dan. Jeff?
I would say the key thing is that collaboration across the project lifecycle. Between the EPC, the owner operator, maybe the digital twin platform provider the owner operator's picked, that collaboration will ultimately drive down costs and make the overall process a lot more efficient and deliver on value.
Good. Ben?
Yeah, I think basically one advice is getting them on board. So your internal customer who actually will, and then take the decision with them, not doing it on your own. If you need advice from them, because they can judge way better which toolkit would fit to their work.
Thanks, Ben. And Shane, with the last minute, you have the last word.
I must temper some of the points I made just before I move into the last word. But I do think the best users and customers we work with are the informed users, and that's because they've done some of this themselves. They built some of it themselves. So I do think a hybrid approach is probably the best coming out here. I have to say. Look, there's never a right time to start, but there's a good time to start, and that's now. A lot of people we've talk to, they go, God, 3 months in, and they're standing up at a twin, and we have a couple of hundred users using, and they go, we spent 12 months talking about this, and we just started, and now 3 months later we have it, and that's really where the journey kicks off, regardless of your data maturity, regardless of your digital roadmap or where you are. There's never a right time, but just start. There's always a good time to start, and take this in a modular way, work agilely, to use that word, and that doesn't mean that you don't set horizons or goals. It just means that you work very collaboratively with the people, whether it's internally or whether it's with a partner. So that would be my advice. It's a good time to start, and that's now.
Great advice. Thank you, Shane. And as we wrap up the session, just want to say thank you to Dan, Ben, Jeff, Shane for a really great discussion. I'm sure we could fill a couple hours if we had the time on this topic. Hopefully it was useful for folks in the audience looking to get a little more insight on approach and strategy and planning going forward. And with that, Adam, we'll send it back to you.